Good day, Chester. This is part 2 of my book on Benjamin Brown French. We left off yesterday with Mrs. Pierce going into a deep depression when her third son was killed by a train right before the inauguration of President Pierce. They had already lost 2 children to the disease, and she was so beside herself she could not go to the White House and assume the position of First Lady, and asked her aunt, Abigail Kent, which lived on Chester Street, to go and assume many of the positions that were needed. Franklin Pierce also took a toll of depression and drank quite a bit, and he was not nominated for a second term. Benjamin now had laid the cornerstone of the Smithsonian Building and the cornerstone of the Washington Monument under the 12th president, Zachary Taylor. He amazingly served under 12 presidents. Benjamin was a Democrat, but became a Republican and supported Abraham Lincoln. Due to his loyalty to Lincoln, he was given the job of planning Lincoln's inauguration in 1861 and was reappointed to the Commissioner of all public buildings. This is a photo of Abraham Lincoln's first inauguration. It was during Lincoln's first inauguration in 1861 that Benjamin learned that his dear wife Elizabeth had breast cancer. Elizabeth had a mastectomy. His brother Edmund's sister-in-law, Mary Ellen Brady, came to care for Elizabeth. In May of 1861, his dear Elizabeth passed away. Benjamin was totally devastated. While reading his journal, one could feel the great love and sadness that Benjamin had after her death. Mary Ellen ended up staying on to help with the household and traveled with Benjamin. It was noted in his journal that he traveled back to Chester with Mary Ellen, and while they were here, they went to Hampton Beach. A year and a half later, Benjamin ended up marrying Mary Ellen, who was 30 years younger. They were married in Concord, Mass., and they honeymooned in Niagara Falls. Benjamin became a member of President Lincoln's inner circle all during the Civil War. French proved himself to be a supporter of the Union cause. President Lincoln discussed military matters and the progress of the war with Benjamin. On February 20th, 1862, President Lincoln's 11-year-old, blue-eyed Willie died in the carved rosewood bed, now known as the Lincoln bed. He died of typhoid fever, most likely from the contaminated water at the White House. Benjamin took charge of all the funeral arrangements for Willie. Willie laid in the green room in a metallic coffin covered with flowers. Here's a photo of the 3 of the 4 sons that the Lincolns had. Benjamin Brown consoled Mrs. Lincoln during this terrible time, and also President Lincoln privately. Absolutely amazingly, on November 19th, 1863, Benjamin Brown French stood beside President Abraham Lincoln as he gave the Gettysburg Address at the Gettysburg National Cemetery, honoring the Union soldiers killed at Gettysburg during the Civil War. One of Benjamin Brown's poems, titled Consecration Hymn, was sung at the Gettysburg dedication on that day. Benjamin Brown French was a poet, and as I had mentioned before, many of his poems were sung at the Congregational Church here in Chester. Here's a picture of B.B. French on a porch at Gettysburg. Have you ever wondered why these two scarecrows are on Chester Street? The scarecrow on the right is Benjamin Brown French standing in front of the house where he was born. And of course, on the left is Abraham Lincoln. Now you know why the two stand together. During the construction of the U.S. Capitol dome, Benjamin had a table made using the leftover pieces from the construction. Some metal pieces that went around the top of the dome were just left over on the floor, and he said, "Could I take one of those?" And the foreman said yes. He took it home, and he had someone put a board on the top of this, and he made a table out of it. He used this at his home, and he says in his journal how it was the highlight in the conversation when people came to his home to see this piece that was made from the dome of the Capitol. The table was made of 3 components: the top, a pillar, and a stand. Benjamin used this table at President Lincoln's second inauguration, March 4th, 1865. Here you can see the table at Abraham Lincoln's second inauguration. It held Lincoln's Bible and a glass of water. I had wondered for years whatever happened to this table that B.B. French made, and just recently found out. So recently that it never got in the book. It is at the Massachusetts Historical Society. I don't know why it went to Massachusetts, not Chester Museum, but hoping one day to be able to go down there and see it, and hopefully it's on display. The following is a recount from his journal. Soon after I went home last month, I went over to the dome of the Capitol with Mr. Fowler, who furnished the iron castings and had put them up. A single baluster was left over around the top of the inner dome. I asked if I might take any other pieces that were left over. So I selected an ornament for the legs and a piece of broken paneling for the top and a screw bolt to put them together. I was about to have them brought over here to my house that I might put them together when Mr. Fowler's foreman volunteered to put them together for me. He did so and had Mr. Galway paint the table and sent it over on the first day of the month. And there it now stands in my bay window, a very handsome and very solid table, the admiration of all my visitors, and such as one probably the world never saw and never will see again. Quote by Benjamin Brown French. When the bronze goddess was placed on top of the Capitol dome, alongside of President Lincoln's name was Benjamin Brown French, Commissioner of Public Buildings. Did you get that? Benjamin Brown French's name is inscribed on the dome of the Capitol of the United States. Benjamin Brown from Chester, New Hampshire. So, when you look up at the dome on the Capitol, remember Benjamin Brown French's name is inscribed on the top. Being the commissioner of all public buildings meant that Benjamin Brown French was in charge of the White House also. Benjamin Brown French introduced Mrs. Lincoln at receptions held twice a week in the Blue Room. These receptions were held every Saturday and every Tuesday. Mrs. Lincoln overindulged herself with lavish dresses and accessories. Benjamin wrote in his journal of a purchase she made of 400 gloves in a 4-month period. On April 15th, 1865, Benjamin woke up. He looked out his window and noticed that the gas lamp lights had not been extinguished. He went to the door in his dressing gown, and there was a soldier walking by, and he said to the soldier, "Why have the gas lights not been extinguished?" And the soldier said, "Have you not heard? President Lincoln has been shot." The Secretary of State, Steward's throat was cut at his residence. The first thing Benjamin did was go right to the Capitol, and he ordered it closed. He then went straight to the Petersons' house across the street from Ford Theater, where the president laid. The president was surrounded by generals and physicians and members of Congress. Benjamin described his breathing heavily, with no hope of survival. Benjamin started his funeral arrangements before Lincoln's actual death. This is the bed that Abraham Lincoln died in at the Petersons' house. Benjamin was included in many famous paintings, like The Death of President Lincoln in the above painting. It depicts all the people who visited over the course of the day. The room was actually a very small room at the Petersons' house, and all these people were not in the room at the same time. Standing to the right of Lincoln is his son Robert, and sitting is Vice President Andrew Johnson. Benjamin started the funeral arrangements before Lincoln's actual death. Benjamin had his son Ben design and build a velvet-draped catafalque, which was a wooden podium that the president's coffin rested upon, laying in state in the rotunda. Here is a photograph of what it looked like when it was built, and this is a photograph of what it looks like today, which is on display at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. This podium for the casket has been used for every president since Abraham Lincoln's death. Jacqueline Kennedy chose it for JFK's funeral, as she was doing everything exactly like Lincoln's funeral. It's been used during the past year for Billy Graham's funeral. It was used for George Bush's funeral, and it was also used for John McCain's funeral. Oh dear, I've run out of YouTube time for today. I will continue tomorrow, so hope you tune in again.